Thank you so much, Dr. Gregory. Our next panelist is Vickie Shoap, who currently serves as the Restorative Justice Specialist in Fairfax County Public Schools. Ms. Shoap has created professional development for the Virginia Department of Education, as well as for the Supreme Court of Virginia. Today, she will discuss on the topic, application of restorative practices and restorative justice in Fairfax County Public Schools. Ms. Shoap.
Good morning. Wow, that is loud, Anne. It feels like it is to me. Is that good? Right there. I want to start by saying that in Fairfax County Public Schools, we have a lot of resources. As a lot of you know, Fairfax is a very diverse community, but we do have a lot of resources. We are, for those of you that aren't from Virginia, we have a population of over 1 million people. Fairfax County borders Washington, D.C. We are the 10th largest school district in Virginia, 244 schools and centers. We have 48 special needs sites. We have over 200,000 students and 25,000 staff. So it's I like to call it a very large system with a lot of moving parts. So you can imagine fidelity of implementation and the challenges that come with that. We have students from over 175 countries, so cultural diversity and understanding culture is really important to our staff as well as our students. Our staff is not as culturally diverse, as you can imagine, as our students are. And that is one thing that our restorative justice program really pulls together to help our staff understand other cultures and their students. You can see what our statistics are. I won't read through all of these. We are becoming more and more diverse in Fairfax County. We have many more Title I schools than we had a few years ago. We have some schools that are 70% and 80% free and reduced lunch, as well as very affluent schools. So let's talk a little bit about what restorative justice is. Anne went through this in her presentation. I'm going to go a little bit deeper with what restorative justice and restorative practices are. I'm a firm believer that it needs to be defined if this work is going to show promise. I believe it's already showing promise. I spent most of my first career, this is kind of a second career for me, in criminal justice in Northern Virginia, but doing restorative justice in juvenile court. So to see this move to the schools, I think is just really important. But I do believe that we need to define what we're doing in order to have fidelity. It's a philosophy, really. Restorative justice is a philosophy that looks at crime and wrongdoing as relational. It's people and relationships that are violated by crime and wrongdoing. There are degrees of responsibility in wrongdoing. You might not be the kid who pulled the fire alarm, but you were there and you knew what was happening. And in a zero-tolerance environment, everyone is charged equally. Reasonable consequences. And this term reasonable is something we talk about a lot in discipline in Fairfax County. Is it reasonable for a kid who makes a clock to be charged in court? The example that you presented earlier. We talk about what's reasonable. What is a reasonable consequence for wrongdoing in schools? It's a victim-centered process of justice, as Anne said. We have very few victim services in our public schools, our private schools as well. Usually what happens if there's a chair thrown across the classroom is everyone is traumatized. Everyone has been harmed by that. But we don't have any real services in place to pay attention to that harm and to the student who's been bullied or victimized. And so this is a victim-centered process. It is an evidence-based alternative to suspension and expulsion. We have chosen in Fairfax County to use the term restorative justice as our umbrella term. Some school districts use the term restorative practices because that's a kinder, gentler sell in schools. People don't like the word justice in schools, but it is very much an issue of justice when you look at the school to prison pipeline. The principles of restorative justice, and these are of course adapted from Howard Zer's work and Harry Micah's work from the late 80s. The focus again is on the harms of wrongdoing, empowering victims, supporting students who've created the harm and helping them to fulfill their obligations and working with them to help them make things right. Provide opportunities for dialogue. Again, bringing people together who've harmed each other is a new paradigm. Typically, we tell the student, we change them out of that class, and we tell the student, don't talk to those people that you harmed. And this really brings people together, and that's very frightening for people to hear. That is a new paradigm. We encourage a collaboration, and this is my favorite principle, and reintegration, rather than punishment and isolation. We push kids further and further out, and there just isn't a way for them to come back, both in our court and our school system. And again, it shows respect to all parties and involve them equally. Everyone in a restorative justice process is respected equally. We clearly separate in Fairfax County the difference between restorative practices and restorative justice. And we find that we're going into year 5 of our implementation. This is working a lot better for us when we started to really draw down and define these things. Restorative practices are skills. They're used in a formal restorative justice process, but they can also be used to create relationships and build connections. Restorative practices grew out of the principles of restorative justice. And then a restorative justice conference is the formal victim-centered process after wrongdoing has occurred. So it's basically prevention and intervention. And I'm a big believer that, although it sounds like a cliche, we really need to have a top-down, bottom-up approach. We need restorative practices in the classroom that builds relationships, but we also need it in the discipline continuum at the top for those kids who are going out the door. And that's really what our implementation is trying to do in Fairfax County. So we've defined that pretty clearly. I won't read through all of these, but this is just the idea of a little comparison between a traditional discipline process and a more restorative discipline process. The offensive behavior means breaking the rules. In a restorative, it means you've harmed a relationship, and schools are all about relationships and making connections. One of the ones I think is some of these bullets that are most important is that the process can produce defensiveness in a traditional discipline process. And we talk about this a lot when I train administrators. Kids, particularly in Fairfax County, the joke is there's 150 lawyers in every block because we're right outside of DC. It's a very litigious culture. Parents tell their kids, don't tell the administrator the truth. Remember the North Carolina case a few years ago where the student was questioned by the SRO and the principal went all the way to the Supreme Court before the parents were there. So now our administrators are not allowed to talk to a student unless there's someone else sitting in the room. The SRO is not allowed to do that. So it really produces a defensive culture. People are lying and they're telling their children to lie because they're afraid of some draconian punishment. In restorative process, we tell the students, bring your truth. Whatever happened, that's your truth, and you won't be further punished if you just bring your truth into the circle. Accountability means taking personal responsibility for your actions, making it right, and moving on with your education, as opposed to just take your medicine and be done with it. Anne mentioned the restorative questions, and these I think are really important, but we also believe it's really important how these are implemented. When we just give people these questions, what happened? What were you thinking? How has your behavior affected others? That is very good for reflecting with a student after there's been an incident of wrongdoing and working through with a student. Our joke is when you bring 2 or more together, you need more training. When you bring people who've harmed each other together in a circle or conference process, you really need people who are skilled and trained. It's not just a matter of throwing people into a circle and asking these questions. You have disaster. And I think that's the implementation and the fidelity of implementation. So if you look at the left side, the I statements, we all remember these I statements. In Fairfax County, we talk about the I statements, and what we tell administrators is sometimes this is what the kid wants, right? Ooh, you see that little glimmer in their eye. I get upset when you joke when I'm teaching. That's exactly what they want, is to engage you and to get you upset. Using these questions, there's accountability in what happened. Anyone who's had teenagers, my kids are grown now, but anyone who's had teenagers knows that why question just kills you, right? They don't know why. Why did you do this? They don't really know why. But what happened? There's accountability in that, because they start to tell you, well, first of all, he shoved me, and then I shoved him. That's where the story comes out. So the questions are very powerful, I believe, if used appropriately. This is what we call our FCPS Portrait of a Graduate. This is what Dr. Garza, who's our superintendent, believes that a student needs to graduate in 2015-16. And I won't go through all of these, but a communicator, a global directed and resilient individual, collaborator, an ethical citizen, a global citizen. Restorative justice really helps with that portrait of a graduate and helps us to help educators understand that these are the skills skills kids need going out into the world. They need those social emotional skills that being in a circle process teaches. This is the continuum of practices in Fairfax County public schools. You can see the difference between prevention and intervention. Restorative practices in the classroom, that's more of an intervention, prevention. Anything from preventative circles, we have some great attendance circle groups, anything above the red line. We literally had to add that red line to say you cannot proceed unless you've had the appropriate training, mentoring, and certification. So this is our continuum of practices. We also have a student-led restorative justice process at Thomas Jefferson High School of Science and Technology for Honor Council, which has been very interesting. The students called me and said, we want to do a restorative justice program. We don't want to be kicking kids out for the first or second time. There's an academic integrity issue. So we have a student-led program. There's a webinar that you can find on Eastern Mennonite Zare Institute for Restorative Justice that our students did. It's called Student-Led RJ in Fairfax County. It's a really great video where the students talk about how they're using restorative justice. And then we have a new program in the last 2 years, we're going into our second year, to try to reduce those disparities. This is very exciting for us because, as you can imagine, in a county like Fairfax, bringing these agencies together has been quite a challenge. It took us about 1.5 years just to come up with the policy and protocol, but we have the Fairfax County Public Schools, the juvenile court, the police department, neighborhood and community services, which provides us space for restorative justice conferences, and then a local service provider that helps us when we have overflow and our staff can't get to everything. So in this project, our goal is to divert students arrested and are charged at school, and it's voluntary. Parents must agree. The youth have no prior charges, but we're getting a lot of those middle school students. It's very surprising to me to see the largest number of students arrested in Fairfax County Public Schools are at the middle school age. That's really scary. So what we're trying to do is reduce that. There's no court connection and no record. So even the date is housed at a nonprofit, so there's no record that that student was ever charged with the crime. So we're really excited about this. We have had 100% compliance in our first year. Last year we reduced our pipeline by 10%, and this year our goal is 20%. So this is our team. You can see we have our directors, we have 2 specialists. I'm a restorative justice specialist too, and then we have 5 teachers, 1 for each region. So our practitioners that go in and work with teachers to teach them how to facilitate in a classroom, they're teachers, training teachers. They're multilingual, they have a lot of different certifications, so I can send them into almost any school in the county. They work with teachers, they do the mentoring and the certification. This is our training. I won't read through all of this, but I often get questions about what's your training like. We have very specific levels of training. Level 1 is RJ 101. You have to go through that before you can even go on to become a facilitator. All the way to restorative practice for the classroom. We offer academy classes for teachers taught by teachers, classroom teachers. Very seasoned classroom teachers, and we also have one-day trainings for teachers. So we're trying to cover everything from discipline and then down to the classroom. Anne went through some of this, so I won't go through all of these slides, but this is some of the research that we give to administrators. We want to make sure that they understand how suspensions triple the probability of that connection to the pipeline. We want to make sure they understand that one suspension in high school reduces that trajectory toward graduation by 20%. And then we talk about the people who make money off incarcerating kids. We talk about that a lot in our system. We put up the numbers for CEO corporation, and administrators are always shocked. We talk about the collateral consequences of early arrest, and we give that information to administrators, and it's always a shock to educators to see what really happens in that pipeline, even though we're hearing a lot about it all the time. The challenges really are the myths, and Anne talked about this a little bit too. We've gone from mass trainings to very focused trainings. I learned a new word when I came to Fairfax County Public Schools, voluntold. People are voluntold. The administrator will say, I want you to get restorative justice training, so they can check that box to say that someone's been trained, and we know that that doesn't work. So now when people sign up for training, I call them and say, what are your intentions with this training? And is your administrator on board? And I need to talk to your administrator. We have schools that are fully restorative in their 3rd or 4th year of implementation and schools that are just starting. It's not a substitute for the existing system of justice. I think one of the big myths is that the pendulum swaying one way with zero tolerance, and now we're going to swing the other way because we're such a reactive society. Now we're going to go the other way, and kids are just going to be getting away with things, and you just have to say you're sorry and sit in the little circle with the talking piece and that kind of thing. So soft on wrongdoing is one I hear a lot. This is soft on wrongdoing. Restorative justice is really about accountability and not punishment. And they're two different things. And we talk a lot about that at our trainings. We're punishing a lot of people in our country, but does that make them really accountable for what they've done? And we don't provide a path back. And for children, that's really too bad. So the challenges really are some of the myths. This takes too much time. It takes time to fill out suspension packets too. Any administrator will tell you that. So these are some, I'm going to go through this data pretty quickly. You can see the growth of referrals. Our program is growing every year. They just gave me a new position, a new teacher position, which I'm thrilled about because our county is facing a very large deficit next year. You've probably heard about that on the news, and yet our team is continuing to grow. It's thrilling to me to see the school board putting the money that they have into stopping some of these practices. Most of the referrals, I put this slide in here because I thought this might interest you, are for fighting and escalating an ongoing conflict. I was even surprised when I saw this data. I thought we were doing a lot more theft, but really, when all the data came in from all of our staff out there in the system, it's really exciting to me that in addition to doing restorative justice conferences when there has been a fight or an incident of assault, we're also doing almost as much prevention with working with counselors and administrators before something rises to the level of being more dangerous. 60% of our students are now agreeing to go into Circle, which we thought is really powerful. The first year of our implementation, it was more like 30%. We had to learn how to get the message out there in the appropriate way to reduce resistance. We found that if someone from our team talks to parents and talks to students, we can almost always get them into the process. If an administrator does it, it doesn't work as well. We really need to have someone who's educated on the process to bring them into the process. Conflict type, as Ann said, it's really important to have a full implementation. We do a lot of staff conflicts, which is not on here, but 70% of our referrals last year were student versus student and student, but we also did 17% with student and staff. It's difficult to get teachers to engage in the process many times. One circle at a time, one school at a time. That's our mantra. If you can get somebody into a circle, if I can get a resistant teacher and really experience what this is like, they usually will use restorative justice after that. Our early data shows very low recidivism. We have to do kind of data dumps from our IT department because our student data is very protected. I don't even have the authority to see that. And I work with discipline every day, with administrators every day. So we're hoping to get that data soon. I don't have it. I was hoping to have it for today. But we know what's coming back from our reports from our teachers, that we are definitely dealing with the discipline gaps, not just with racial disparity, but with special needs students. Victim and parents, 100% satisfaction with the process. Parents love this, that they have a voice and their children have a voice in the process. Administrators are telling us we're not seeing those kids back again. Those high flyers, we don't see them back again. So although we don't have our recidivism yet for the last 2 years, we know that what we're hearing from our administrators is that it just isn't, they're not coming back again. Students are starting to ask for circles, and that's really important to us. One of the administrators told us that a student came into us, can you get that lady back here again? I think we need a circle in my classroom. So students are now starting to ask for it, and that's exciting for our teachers. And then the last thing is we had county principal meeting, and there's about almost 300 people in the room in March. And Dr. Garza was talking about restorative justice, and one of my friends who's a principal at Centerville High School, which is a large high school in Fairfax County, said, Vickie, it was so interesting. Those of us who are early adopters of restorative justice were excited when we started to see some of the results of the work that we've done. It's no longer cool to be at the table that rejects RJ. So that has completely shifted. And my boss, who's the director of special services, Dr. Jane Lipp, said that's a culture point, that's a climate point. And after only 4 years, it's very exciting. So we're still learning in our program, but we're continuing to grow. And it's very, very exciting to see this happening in the schools. So thank you all.